Chapter 5 of Ester Ried's Namesake. Ester Ried's Namesake by Pansy. Chapter 5. A Rebel. Much as their guest disliked everything about her Western home, and outspoken as she was concerning her martyrdom in being obliged to remain there, it was nevertheless discovered that she did not wish to return to the straitened home in the East, where the youngest daughter was working strenuously to support her mother in comfort. Aunt Sarah's way of describing her was, "Mary is too selfish to live. She is bound up in mother to the degree that she simply can't think of anybody else. She wouldn't care if I half starved, provided mother was comfortable. Mother and Mary are really very much alike. They care very little what becomes of the rest of the world, provided they can be together and have what they want." The missionary's wife had been long in the school of patience, and had learned to make no reply even to such remarks as these; but they had helped her to understand that her sister Sarah must by no means return to the Eastern home, so long as it was possible to provide for her in other ways. The long talk which she and her husband had together, on the evening in question, had no other result than the deepening of their sympathy for each other, unless it also increased their sense of helplessness. "I don't see but we are shut up to the situation, with nothing to do but make the best of it," Mr. Randall said, at last, with one of the few sighs that he allowed himself in his wife's presence. It was she who smiled and said, "Never mind, Randall, it has done me good to talk it over with you. Perhaps some way will open that we have not thought of." And the way was opening even then. The next morning's mail brought it to them. A college friend and brother minister, who had stopped overnight in the little Western manse and had learned, more by keen observation than by words, some of the things that lay heavy on the missionary's heart, remembered him 6 months afterwards, when there came into his care certain trust moneys to be spent in aiding the sons and daughters of missionaries in their education; said education to be sought in the particular college which was the hobby of the man who left the trust. Thus, all unexpectedly, a marvel had worked its way into her life, and in the space of a few weeks Ester Ried Randall became a college girl, 500 miles removed from her father's house. In this college a custom obtained by which industrious students could aid substantially in their own support. A regular system of hours, range of employments, and a schedule of prices had been evolved, a member of the student body serving as secretary. To him the townspeople could at given hours apply for helpers, and the students could register at his office and state their preferences. In this way the needs of employers and those desiring employment were met, and there was a fair degree of mutual satisfaction. Ester Randall had been among the first of the new students to avail herself of this opportunity, and had enrolled herself as willing to help at general housework. "It is what I am sure I can do, and do well, thanks to my dear mother," she wrote home. "So I have given my name and mentioned just a very few of my many accomplishments, and am anxiously awaiting a summons. I feel sure there is somewhere in this town an overburdened housekeeper, to whom I am to appear as an angel of light, to broil her steaks or wash her dishes in the very best way in the world, namely, the way my mother does. Only think, in this way I can earn my room and board! I am sure that it will take a great big load from father's shoulders, and mine too, for I like to pay as much of my way as I can. And you needn't be troubled over it, mother dear. It will not be unpleasant to me. There is a very lovely spirit in the college about all such things. There seems to be no caste feeling whatever. The students who help in these ways to meet their expenses are on exactly the same social plane as the others. There are dozens of them who wholly or in part support themselves, and the others take it as a matter of course. So please tell Aunt Sarah not to fear that I shall be lowered socially by my industry." The mother was glad that her young daughter could not hear her Aunt Sarah's lugubrious sigh and doleful words. "Think of a granddaughter of Benedict Bradford washing dishes and sweeping rooms for a living! If father knows what we have all come to, I don't see how he can rest in his grave." "Never mind, Sarah," was the missionary's cheery rejoinder. "Father isn't resting in his grave, remember. I have no doubt but that he is very busy in heaven. And if he knows that our Ester is sweeping rooms, and she sweeps according to the pattern, why then Who sweeps a room as by thy law, makes that and the action fine, you know." But poor Aunt Sarah did not catch so much as a glimpse of the fine spirit back of the father's cheery words, and only said: "Oh, I know, Spencer, you can make sport out of anything. It must be a comfort not to have a sensitive nature. I often wish that I had been made so." On the afternoon that Esther Randall sat on the steps of Mrs. Victor's side porch and exchanged views with her classmates on theological and various other matters, she had been a college girl for nearly 7 months, and during 5 of them she had earned room and board by her work in Mrs. Victor's kitchen. That she did not find life a bed of roses, all who have undertaken to earn their living in such ways will readily understand. It is quite likely that they will understand it better than did the girl herself. She had for so long been accustomed to attributing most of her trials as the direct or indirect result of her Aunt Sarah's influence, that it was a matter of surprise as well as disappointment to her that, being several hundred miles removed from the cause of friction, there should still be friction in her life. An earnest purpose to make the most of her opportunities, and at the same time save her father every possible penny, carried her safely through many troubles, but did not keep her from living on what she called the edge of a volcano with an eruption imminent. She sat still on the steps for several minutes, watching the 2 girls until a corner hid them from view. Then, with a long-drawn sigh, went to her duties. Half unconsciously she was letting her thoughts dwell on the contrast between her friends and herself, as represented by externals. No girls in college were more to be envied, she believed, than those 2. They represented fathers who apparently lived for the purpose of catering to their daughters' slightest wishes, and had substantial bank accounts to aid them. Also, both were exceptionally good scholars, standing well with their professors generally, and being reasonably popular with their classmates. To Esther Randall's eyes the contrasts between them and herself were many and strongly marked. Occasionally she tried to analyze the reasons for their having become, almost from the first, her intimate friends. There were not many subjects upon which they thought alike, yet their intimacy was so marked that their classmates had named them the Trio. As Esther exchanged her street dress for one that did duty in the kitchen, there was a cloud on her face. She could not get away from the contrasts. The girls were at home by this time. They had a suite of rooms in one of the most expensive boarding houses in the city. When Esther felt especially lugubrious, she dwelt on the fact that these rooms were luxuriously furnished and included even a private bath. It was sometimes difficult not to contrast them with the very straitened quarters and meager accommodations for which she gave daily service. When she was gay, she seized her broken-nosed pitcher, and as she dashed down 2 flights of stairs to the kitchen hydrant to fill it, told herself that she was going to her private bath. But when she was not gay, she hated even these trivial evidences of her cramped life, and could not help telling herself that the good things of this world were very unevenly divided. The cloud on her face deepened as she entered the kitchen, and the sight that greeted her was certainly not cheering. Not only the capacious table, but the sink and even the range were piled high with unwashed dishes and cooking utensils. The butler's pantry which separated the kitchen from the dining room was in an equal state of disorder. Everywhere was evidence of a hurriedly cooked meal, and then an utter abandonment of the scene of warfare. All this was entirely contrary to the scheduled plan. Esther was supposed to come on duty at 5 o'clock to assist in the preparation of a 6 o'clock dinner for 7 persons, then to serve at table, smuggling in her own dinner between times as best she could, then do the dishes, put the kitchen in perfect order, and make the dining table ready for breakfast. It had been presumed that all this could be accomplished between the hours of 5 and 8, which would cover the 3 hours of service she had pledged to give at night. Esther, in considering it, had reasoned with the home kitchen for a base, and her mother's methods of work for a guide, and had said unhesitatingly that she believed she could do it. But there were complications undreamed of by her. Continually the dinner was late, not from any fault of Esther's, who had been trained to habits of rigid punctuality, and was to be relied upon to open the kitchen door as the clock was striking 5. But Miss Katherine was out with guests, and must be waited for, or the son of the house had not yet come in, and had said that he might bring friends with him; or the young people were playing tennis, and dinner could not be served until the game was concluded; or Miss Marian was seized just at 6 o'clock with a desire for a certain salad dressing which "wouldn't take 5 minutes to make," and which always did take 25. These, and dozens of other reasons quite as plausible, made the dinner hour perilously uncertain to the two members of the family who were trying to live by rule: Ester and the 14-year-old high school girl, the youngest daughter of the house. Moreover, it was continually happening, as on the present occasion, that unexpected guests came to luncheon, and the mother and her two grown-up daughters, who had that meal in charge, were hurried by some society function, and simply compelled to leave things in confusion. Of course this state of things must either make a late dinner or give Ester extra labor afterwards, such as could not be crowded into the 3 hours of service. This, in brief, was one of the problems continually confronting the girl trained to strict ideas of honor. There had seemed to her, heretofore, to be nothing for her to do but give the extra time needed to accomplish her pledged portion of work, and to borrow from her hours of sleep to make up the deficiency. But on this day she was in no mood to be patient with extra burdens. As she rapidly moved the litter from the range, and with the skill of an engineer brought the fire in subjection to her will, her lips took a firm setting that made her look much older than she was, and the expression on her face was such that had Aunt Sarah been there to comment, she would surely have said: "Now she's mad, she shows it in her eyes." Mrs. Victor came into the room before the table had been cleared for action. "Dear, dear!" she said deprecatingly, "this is dreadful, isn't it? I didn't know that Katherine left things in quite so bad a shape. But the poor child couldn't help it. She simply had to be ready for the matinee by 3 o'clock, and we had unexpected company at luncheon as usual. We are the most uncertain family. Well, never mind, we'll make the dinner light and easy to manage. Just a steak and some baked potatoes and canned corn. Did you say there was no corn? Oh, I remember, you told me yesterday, didn't you? Well, just phone for it. Call up Streeter's, they are always prompt. Tell them they must be. And we'll just have sliced tomatoes with lettuce for salad. All easy things to manage, you see. As for dessert, make it cake and fruit, strawberries or peaches, it doesn't matter which. Why, dear me, that dinner will almost get itself, won't it?" But it did not. Despite the fact that Mrs. Victor gave what help she could between her calls to the telephone and the side door to chat with a neighbor. Ester fairly flew. Down cellar for potatoes, to the phone for corn, to the ice box for steak, then to the phone again to ask why the corn did not come, then down cellar again for jelly that Mrs. Victor decided must be added to the bill of fare. Despite her utmost effort, and having reached a grim resolution to rebel, Ester's sturdy conscience compelled her to make even extraordinary efforts at haste. It was 25 minutes past 6 before that simple dinner, which was almost to get itself, was ready to be served. But even then Katherine had not arrived, and as 2 ladies were with her who were guests, she must be waited for, at least for what Mrs. Victor called a reasonable length of time. It was when Ester, who had ignored her own dinner and given every moment of time to her work, was carrying a tray loaded with freshly dried dishes to their places in the dining room, that the clock on the college tower told 8. She gave a troubled look at the dining room clock, that was even now a few minutes later. She had hoped to be farther along in her work by 8 o'clock. There were still many dishes to be washed, and the kitchen table was in wild disorder. In short, there was a full hour of work yet to be done. But Ester had already given her 4 hours of labor that day, and her resolution stood firm. It strengthened it to remember that she had given even more than her full hour of morning service to get the guest chamber ready for company. She assured herself that if this were the first time she had been imposed upon it might be borne. But it was not the first, nor the dozenth, and justice to her college work simply demanded that she should make a stand for her rights. She set the heavily laden tray on a corner of the dining table, and, not permitting herself a glance around the disordered kitchen, sped up the back stairs to the little room on the 3rd floor, which was for her exclusive use. What happened next, and how she felt, she shall tell herself. CHAPTER VI.